The galaxy changed faster than anyone expected. Within months of the Battle of Sentinel's Gate, the old order that had dominated civilized space for 10,000 years began to crumble. The Velthari Empire, humiliated and exposed, faced rebellion from species they had oppressed for centuries. The economic powers that had exploited weaker races found their partners abandoning them for fairer arrangements with us. Earth, alliances that had seemed permanent dissolved overnight as species realized they no longer had to fear the consequences of independence. Ambassador Claire Dawson stood at the center of this transformation. She led negotiations for a new galactic framework in a neutral station far from the Concord's capital. Representatives from 30 species gathered in a chamber that had been designed specifically for this moment. With seats arranged in a circle rather than the hierarchical rows of the old assembly, the Galactic Concord was built on a simple principle. Claire said to the gathered delegates, "Those who arrived first had the right to determine the fate of those who came later. Power decided everything. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak accepted what they were given." She paused, looking around the circle at faces from a dozen different species. The Morwen representative, Sitha, sat beside the Kethnari trade minister. The Voltari elder had brought 3 young advisors, who had never seen their species treated with respect in any official forum. Even species from the old Concord had sent observers, watching nervously to see what humanity would build in place of the system they had maintained. "We are here to create something different," Claire continued. "Not a new hierarchy with humanity at the top, but a genuine partnership where every species has a voice that matters, where trade benefits all parties, where military power exists to protect, not to conquer." The negotiations that followed were difficult. 3 centuries of accumulated grievances could not be resolved in a single session. Species that had been enemies for generations struggled to sit in the same room. Former exploiters and exploited alike had to learn new ways of relating to each other. But slowly, carefully, a new framework began to take shape. Admiral Nathan Cole oversaw the military aspects of the transition. His task force patrolled the border regions where violence had been common under the old order. Human ships responded to distress calls from species that had never received help before. When a Velthari remnant fleet attempted to raid a Morwen convoy, Nathan's forces intercepted them within hours. "You are violating the territorial rights of a protected species," Nathan transmitted to the Velthari commander. "Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The Velthari ships hesitated. Under the old order, they would have ignored such a warning from anyone but another major power. But the galaxy had changed. They withdrew without firing a shot. On the surface of a dozen worlds, human engineers worked alongside their counterparts from other species. They built communication networks that connected isolated colonies to the wider galaxy. They constructed medical facilities that provided care regardless of species or political alignment. They established schools where young beings of all kinds could learn together. Patricia Lane retired from active duty 6 months after the revelation. She had given her entire career to the secret, and now the secret was no longer needed. Her replacement was a younger officer who had grown up knowing that humanity was strong, not one who had spent decades pretending to be weak. "The hardest part is over," Patricia told Claire during their final meeting before she left Earth Command. "We spent 300 years preparing for the moment when we could stop hiding. Now comes the harder work of building something worthy of all that sacrifice." 1 year after the Battle of Sentinel's Gate, the Galactic Assembly held its first session. Unlike the old Concord, this body gave every member species an equal vote. The great powers no longer controlled the agenda. Decisions were made through negotiation rather than intimidation. Claire Dawson addressed the Assembly as its first speaker. She had been chosen by a vote of the member species, the first human to hold such a position in galactic history. "We gather here today not as victors and vanquished," she said, "but as partners in a shared future. The old order taught us that strength was the only thing that mattered. We are here to prove that wisdom, compassion, and justice can matter more." Behind her, the flags of 40 species hung in a circle around the chamber. The Morwen banner flew beside the Kethnari standard. Even representatives from the Velthari Empire had taken their seats, though they sat quietly, still adjusting to a galaxy where they were no longer at the top. After the ceremony, Claire walked through the corridors of the new assembly station. She passed beings of every shape and size, former enemies now working together in offices and laboratories and common spaces. A Morwen scientist was explaining her research to a group that included a Velthari engineer. Kethnari traders were negotiating deals with species that had once been forbidden to speak to them. She found a quiet observation deck where she could watch the stars without interruption. The lights of ships from 100 worlds moved through the darkness, carrying goods and people and ideas across distances that her ancestors could barely have imagined. A young human diplomat named Tony Kim found her there. He was new to the service, just beginning the career that Claire had spent a lifetime building. "Ambassador Dawson? I hope I am not disturbing you." Claire smiled and gestured for him to join her at the window. "Not at all. What brings you here?" Tony hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since he first learned the truth about humanity's history. "Do you ever regret it? All those years of pretending? All the insults you had to accept, the smiles you had to force, the things you had to let go without response?" Claire considered the question carefully. She thought about her grandmother, who had died believing she would never see the revelation. She thought about her mother, who had spent her entire career maintaining a facade that sometimes made her weep with frustration. She thought about the countless humans across 3 centuries who had kept a secret, never knowing if their sacrifice would amount to anything. "Every smile I forced, every insult I swallowed, every moment I pretended to be harmless," Claire said slowly. "It was worth it, because my grandchildren will never have to pretend. They can walk into any room in this galaxy and be exactly who they are. They can speak their minds without fear of destruction. They can build relationships based on honesty rather than deception." She turned to look at Tony, and her eyes held the weight of everything humanity had endured and everything they had achieved. "That is what we bought with 300 years of patience," she said. "A future where no human ever has to hide again. And I would do it all over, every single day, without hesitation." Tony nodded slowly, beginning to understand the magnitude of what had been accomplished. Outside the window, the stars continued their eternal dance. Ships from the New Alliance moved among them, carrying the promise of a galaxy transformed. The old powers watched and worried, but they also adapted, slowly accepting that the universe they had known was gone forever, somewhere in that vast darkness. A child on a human colony world looked up at the night sky and dreamed of the adventures waiting among the stars. She did not know the history of sacrifice that had made her freedom possible. She did not need to know. She simply grew up believing that humanity had always been strong, had always been respected, had always been free. And that was exactly what 3 centuries of patience had been designed to achieve. The stars would never forget the day humanity stopped pretending. They would tell the story for 10,000 years, in legends and histories and cautionary tales. The species that seemed harmless, that smiled through insults and bowed to greater powers, had been playing the longest game in galactic history, and they had won. The Galactic Concord Assembly had never been so quiet. Representatives from 300 species filled the great chamber, their bodies still and their eyes fixed on the human ambassador who stood at the central podium. The holographic displays behind her showed images that had spread across civilized space in the days since the Battle of Sentinel's Gate. Veltari, warships burning, human vessels moving with impossible speed. The proud flagship Dominion, captured and humiliated. Claire Dawson looked out at the assembly and felt the weight of every eye upon her. These were the beings who had laughed at humanity for 3 centuries. They had mocked human technology, dismissed human ambitions, and treated her species as barely worthy of a seat in this great hall. Now they were afraid. Distinguished representatives. Claire began, her voice calm and steady. I stand before you today not to threaten or to boast. I come to explain. The chamber remained silent. Even the species who usually whispered during human speeches were paying attention now. 300 years ago, humanity joined the Galactic Concord. We were young and eager, excited to take our place among the stars. We believed that this assembly represented the highest ideals of civilization, cooperation, equality, justice. Claire paused, letting her words settle over the audience. We were wrong. A murmur rippled through the chamber, but Claire continued without waiting for it to subside. We watched how the Concord truly operated. We saw the Veltari annex the homeworld of the Morlun and scatter their people across the galaxy as refugees. We witnessed the economic exploitation of the Kathnari, their resources stripped away through trade agreements that gave them no real choice. We observed how every newcomer species that tried to assert itself was crushed by those who arrived before them. Representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Veltari delegation sat in stony silence, their scales dull with shame. Humanity's founders made a choice, Claire said. They understood that if we revealed our true capabilities, we would be destroyed before we could defend ourselves. So they created a plan that would span generations. We would smile. We would bow. We would accept every insult and every humiliation. And we would build. The displays behind her changed, showing images of the hidden fleet. Ships that had never appeared on any Concord registry. Facilities carved into asteroids and systems that the Concord had surveyed and dismissed. Technology that exceeded anything the galaxy's most advanced species possessed. For 300 years, your intelligence services monitored our shipyards. They counted our vessels. They analyzed our technology. And they saw exactly what we wanted them to see. The truth was hidden in places you never thought to look. Built by people who knew they would never live to see the results of their sacrifice. Claire stepped forward, her eyes sweeping across the assembly. We did not do this because we wanted war. We did it because we knew that peace built on weakness is not peace at all. It is simply submission by another name. The Veltari demanded our colonies because they believed we had no choice but to give them. They were wrong. The chamber erupted in noise. Species shouted questions and accusations. The Veltari ambassador rose to his feet, his scales flushed with anger. But Claire stood unmoved at the podium, waiting for the chaos to settle. I have one more thing to share with this assembly, she said when the noise finally died down. Humanity kept records. Every broken treaty, every unfair trade agreement, every quiet atrocity committed by Concord species against those weaker than themselves. We have been watching for 3 centuries, and we remember everything. The silence that followed was different from before. It was the silence of beings who suddenly realized that their secrets might not be secret after all. Far from the Concord's capital, Admiral Nathan Cole led a humanitarian mission to a world that most of the galaxy had forgotten. The Morlun colony on the frozen moon of Gethris 4 had been struggling for survival since the Veltari conquest scattered their species across the stars. They had no allies, no resources, and no hope. Until now. Nathan's shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere, escorted by fighters from the carrier Freedom. The landing zone was a patch of cleared ice near a settlement of crude shelters and recycled equipment. As the shuttle touched down, Nathan saw Morwen emerging from their homes. Their slender bodies wrapped in insulated clothing, their large eyes wide with fear and confusion. A human did not simply visit a Morwen colony. It did not happen. The Concord had taught humanity's species to avoid the fallen and the forgotten. Nathan stepped out of the shuttle, flanked by his officers and followed by cargo containers filled with supplies. He approached the largest shelter where a group of Morwen elders had gathered. "I am Admiral Nathan Cole of the United Earth Fleet," he said, his translator converting his words into the Morwen language. "We have brought food, medicine, and equipment. We ask nothing in return." The eldest of the Morwen, a gray-furred female with scars across her face, stepped forward. Her name was Sitha, and she had been a scientist before the conquest. Now she was simply a survivor. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No one helps the Morwen. We have nothing to offer. We have no power, no influence, no value to anyone." Nathan knelt so that he was at eye level with her. "For 300 years, my people pretended to be weak because showing our strength would have meant our destruction. We watched species like yours suffer because we could not help without revealing ourselves. That time is over." Sitha stared at him for a long moment. Then tears began to flow from her large eyes, freezing almost instantly in the cold air. "We thought the galaxy had forgotten us," she whispered. "Humanity remembers," Nathan said. "And we are not the only ones. Other species that the Concord has exploited are reaching out to us. They want to build something better than what exists now. If your people are willing, we would like you to be part of that future." On Earth, Admiral Patricia Lane met with representatives from a dozen marginalized species in a secure facility far from any Concord observation post. The Kethnari had sent their senior trade minister. The Voltari, a species whose homeworld had been seized as collateral for debts they could never repay, had sent their last surviving elder. Even the Thessan, who had been forcibly relocated 3 times in the past century, had found a way to send a representative. "We are not interested in becoming the new Velthari," Patricia told them. "We did not spend 3 centuries building our power so that we could become the same kind of tyrants who forced us to hide in the first place." "And what do you want?" the Kethnari minister asked. "A new order. One where species are judged by their contributions rather than their military strength. Where trade agreements benefit all parties instead of just the powerful. Where no one has to smile through insults and pretend to be less than they are." The representatives exchanged glances. Hope was a dangerous thing for species that have been crushed too many times to count. Can such a thing truly exist? The Volturi elder asked. "It can if we build it together," Patricia replied. "Humanity has the power to protect those who join us. But power without purpose is just another form of tyranny. We need partners who will help us create something worth protecting." In his cell aboard a human prison ship, Overseer Kath received an unexpected visitor. Claire Dawson entered the room alone, without guards or weapons, and sat across from the being who had threatened to take everything from her people. "Why didn't you destroy us when you had the chance?" Kath asked. "You had the power. You could have crushed the Velthari fleet completely. You could have invaded our worlds and taken everything we own." Claire considered the question carefully before answering. "Because that would make us like you," she said. "And we spent 3 centuries becoming something better." Kath stared at her, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. In his entire life, he had never encountered a species that had power and chose not to use it for conquest. "What happens now?" he asked. "That depends on your people," Claire replied. "The old order is ending. A new one is being born. The Velthari can be part of that new order, or they can cling to the past and be left behind. The choice is yours." She rose and walked to the door, leaving Kath alone with his thoughts and the terrible realization that humanity had been playing a game he never understood. The Velthary fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sentinels' gate system like a predator arriving to claim its prey. 200 warships spread across the darkness of space, their weapons charged and their crews confident. Overseer Keth stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Dominion, watching the sensor displays with satisfaction. "Report," he commanded. "We are detecting 30 human vessels in defensive formation around the third planet," his tactical officer replied. "Standard configuration. Light cruisers and patrol ships. No capital vessels." Keth's thin lips stretched into a smile. This was exactly what he had expected. The humans had sent a token force to create the appearance of resistance, but they knew they could not win. They would posture for a few hours, then surrender their colonies rather than face destruction. "Open a channel to their commander," Keth ordered. The view screen flickered, and the face of a human male appeared. He was young for a commanding officer, perhaps 35 years old, with dark hair and steady brown eyes. His uniform bore the insignia of a commander. "I am Overseer Keth of the Velthary Empire," Keth announced. "You are Commander Daniel Perry, commanding officer of the Defense Force at Sentinel's Gate. Commander Perry, you have witnessed the size of my fleet. You understand that resistance is futile. I offer you one opportunity to withdraw your vessels and begin evacuation procedures. If you comply, your people will be allowed to leave peacefully. If you resist, we will destroy your ships and take what we want regardless." Daniel Perry looked at Keth through the screen, and something in his expression made the overseer pause. There was no fear in those human eyes, no desperation. Instead, there was something that looked almost like anticipation. "Overseer Keth, I appreciate your offer," Daniel said calmly, "but I must decline. Sentinel's Gate is human territory, and it will remain human territory. You should have listened when we asked nicely." Keth stared at the human for a moment, then laughed. "Very well, Commander. You have chosen destruction. All ships, advance and engage." The Velthary fleet surged forward, 200 warships moving in perfect formation toward the thin human defensive line. Keth settled into his command chair, expecting the battle to be over within the hour. The first sign that something was wrong came when the human ships began to move. They did not retreat or scatter as Velthary tactical doctrine predicted. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the advancing fleet, executing maneuvers that should have been impossible. They twisted and rolled at speeds that would have killed any Velthary crew, their ships bending through angles that defied conventional physics. "What are they doing?" Keth demanded. "No vessel can maintain those acceleration curves." The humans appear to have modified their ships for extreme maneuverability, his tactical officer reported, confusion evident in his voice. "Their crews are withstanding forces that would crush our soldiers." The two forces met, and the battle that followed would be studied by military historians for centuries. Human weapons spoke first, and they spoke with a voice that the Velthary had never heard. Energy beams lanced out with precision that exceeded anything in Concord technology, striking Velthary ships at weak points that should have been impossible to target at combat speeds. Missiles streaked through space, their guidance systems adapting to every defensive measure the Velthary deployed. 3 Velthary cruisers exploded in the first minute of combat. Then 5 more. Then 10. Keth watched his display with growing horror as red icons began to multiply across the tactical screen. His ships were dying, and the humans were not fighting like any species he had ever encountered. They did not follow predictable patterns or standard doctrines. Every time his commanders adapted to one tactic, the humans shifted to something completely different. "Focus fire on their lead vessel," Keth commanded. "Destroy their commander." 20 Velthary ships concentrated their weapons on Daniel Perry's cruiser. Enough firepower to destroy a small moon converged on the human ship, and for a moment, Keth believed he had won. Then the human ship emerged from the firestorm, its shields flickering but intact, and returned fire with weapons that carved through Velthari armor like paper. "Impossible," Keth whispered. "Those shields are beyond anything we possess." The battle continued for 20 minutes before the true disaster arrived. Sensor alarms screamed across the Velthari fleet as new contacts appeared. Throughout the system, ships emerged from behind asteroids, powered up from concealed positions, and cloaked in formations that surrounded the Velthari armada. These were not the small vessels of the original defensive force. These were capital ships, carriers and battleships and cruisers that dwarfed anything the Velthari had brought to this fight. Where did they come from? Keth's tactical officer asked, his voice breaking with fear. Nathan Cole's voice came through the communication channel, calm and measured. "Overseer Keth, this is Admiral Nathan Cole of the 1st Human Fleet. You are surrounded. Your ships are outmatched. I offer you one opportunity to surrender your fleet and save the lives of your crews." Keth stared at the tactical display. The human fleet numbered over 700 vessels, and they had positioned themselves to cut off every avenue of escape. His 200 ships were trapped in a killing zone, and every second brought more destruction. "This is a trick," Keth said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You cannot have this many ships. Your fleet was small. Your technology was inferior. We monitored your shipyards. We counted your vessels. You counted what we wanted you to count," Nathan replied. "You saw what we wanted you to see. For 300 years, Overseer, we let you believe we were harmless. That was our greatest weapon." The battle resumed, but it was no longer a fight. It was a slaughter. Human ships moved through the Velthari formation with terrible efficiency, their weapons striking with precision that left no room for defense. Velthari cruisers tried to flee and were cut down. Velthari destroyers attempted to ram their attackers and were vaporized before they could close the distance. The flagship Dominion took hit after hit, her shields failing, her hull breaching, her crew dying at their stations. When it was over, 167 Velthari ships had been destroyed or disabled. The human fleet had lost 11 vessels. Keth stood on the burning bridge of the Dominion, surrounded by the bodies of his officers, watching human Marines move through the wreckage of his command. A young human soldier approached him, weapon raised but not firing. "Overseer Keth, you are now a prisoner of the United Earth Fleet," the soldier said. "If you cooperate, you will be treated according to the laws of war. Resist, and you will be restrained." Keth said nothing. There was nothing to say. Everything he had believed about humanity had been proven wrong in the space of a single hour. The galaxy would never look at humans the same way again. Daniel Perry appeared beside Nathan Cole on the command frequency, both men watching the final moments of the battle. "Admiral, we have secured the Velthari flagship. Overseer Keth is in custody." "Excellent work, Commander. Begin rescue operations for Velthari survivors. They are enemies, but they are also living beings who deserve the chance to go home to their families." "Understood, sir." Nathan turned to look at the debris field that had once been the most powerful fleet the Velthari had ever assembled. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was watching. News of this battle would spread to every civilized system within days. The Pretense was over. Humanity had revealed itself at last. Captain Nathan Cole had served in Earth's fleet for 23 years. He had commanded patrol vessels along the border, escorted cargo ships through dangerous space, and represented humanity at joint exercises with Concord allies. In all that time, he had followed the same orders that every human officer received on their first day of service: smile, cooperate, never show them what we can really do. The carrier Endurance was one of 12 capital ships in Earth's official fleet. She was a capable vessel, armed with standard weapons and protected by adequate shields. The Concorde considered her typical of human technology, neither impressive nor threatening. Nathan had spent years making sure that impression remained intact. Now everything was about to change. Nathan stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching his crew work at their stations. They were good people, professionals who had served with distinction under difficult circumstances. Most of them knew nothing about protocol revelation. They had no idea that their captain had been keeping secrets from them for his entire career. The communication officer, a young woman named Lisa Morgan, turned from her console. "Captain, we are receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. Admiral Lane is requesting a secure channel." "Transfer it to my ready room," Nathan said. "Commander Bradley, you have the bridge." His executive officer, a steady man named Paul Bradley, nodded and took the command chair as Nathan walked to his private office. The door closed behind him, and he activated the security protocols that would ensure their conversation remained private. Admiral Patricia Lane appeared on his screen, her expression grave. "Captain Cole, protocol revelation has been activated. You are ordered to proceed to the following coordinates and await further instructions." Nathan felt his heart beat faster as he read the coordinates. They pointed to a region of space that appeared empty on every Concorde map, a dead system with no habitable planets and no strategic value. But Nathan knew better. He had visited that system once, 20 years ago, when he first learned the truth about humanity's preparations. "Understood, Admiral. What is our timeline?" "The Valkyrie have given us 7 days. We intend to use every hour of it. When you arrive at the rendezvous point, you will assume command of Task Force Revelation. Your orders will follow." The screen went dark. Nathan sat in silence for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. Then he returned to the bridge. "Helm, set course for the following coordinates," he said, transmitting the data to the navigation console. "Maximum speed." "Sir, those coordinates are an empty space," the helmsman said, confused. "There's nothing there." Nathan allowed himself a small smile. "There is more there than you know, Lieutenant. All hands, this is the captain. We are about to learn things that will change everything you believe about our fleet and our species. What you see in the coming hours is classified at the highest level. Trust in your training, trust in your shipmates, and trust in humanity." The Endurance jumped to faster than light speed, leaving the familiar patrol routes behind. 6 hours later, they emerged from the jump at the edge of the dead system. Lisa Morgan was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, I am detecting multiple contacts. Hundreds of them. They are using human identification codes, but these ships are not in any database I have ever seen." Nathan walked to the main view screen. "Put it on display." The screen flickered to life, and the bridge crew gasped. Ships were emerging from concealment all around them. They rose from the shadows of asteroids, powered up from hidden positions among the system's moons, and decloaked in formations that stretched across thousands of kilometers. They were human vessels, but they were unlike anything the Concorde had ever seen. The carriers were twice the size of the Endurance, their hulls bristling with weapons that gleamed in the dim light of the distant star. Cruisers moved in perfect formation, their engines burning with a power that exceeded anything in the official fleet. Destroyers darted between the larger ships, fast and deadly, their sleek profiles designed for a kind of warfare that humanity had never publicly revealed. "How is this possible?" Commander Bradley asked, his voice shaking. "Where did all of this come from?" Nathan turned to face his crew. "For 300 years, humanity has been building in secret. Hidden shipyards in dead systems. Research facilities buried inside asteroids. Factories on moons that the Concorde surveyed and dismissed as worthless. Every time the galaxy looked at us and saw a weak species with limited technology, we smiled and let them believe it, because believing it made them careless. On the screen, more ships continued to appear. The count passed 500, then 600, then 700. These were not patrol vessels or defensive platforms. These were warships designed and built for one purpose. The technology you see is not copied from the Concorde, Nathan continued. Our engineers studied their systems for generations, learned how they worked, and then built something better. Our weapons fire faster and hit harder. Our shields absorb more damage. Our engines are more efficient. We let them think we were backward, because showing them the truth would have meant war before we were ready. A new transmission came through, and Nathan's screen displayed the face of an officer he had never met. She was a woman in her 60s, with close-cropped gray hair and the insignia of a rear admiral. Captain Cole, I am Admiral Sarah Wright, commanding officer of the 1st Hidden Fleet. Welcome to Task Force Revelation. You have been selected to serve as tactical coordinator for the coming operation. Admiral, I am honored, Nathan replied. What are our orders? The Velthary fleet is advancing on the Sentinel's Gate system. They expect to find a token defense force and an easy victory. Instead, they will find us. Admiral Wright's expression hardened. For 3 centuries, we have swallowed our pride and accepted every humiliation the galaxy offered. That ends today. When the Velthary arrive at Sentinel's Gate, they will discover that humanity is not what they believed us to be. Back on Earth, Admiral Patricia Lane stood before the United Earth Council in a secure chamber beneath the capital city. The council members, most of whom had no knowledge of protocol revelation, listened in stunned silence as she explained what their ancestors had built. The first generation understood that the Concorde would never accept us as equals, Patricia said. They saw how newcomer species were treated, exploited and marginalized by those who arrived first. So they made a choice. They would play the role the galaxy expected while preparing for the day when pretending would no longer be enough. 300 years, the council president said, his voice barely audible. 300 years of deception. 300 years of patience, Patricia corrected. 300 years of sacrifice by people who knew they would never see the results of their work. They smiled through insults so that their grandchildren could walk with dignity. They built in secret so that future generations would have the power to say no. The president looked at the display showing the Hidden Fleet assembling at Sentinel's Gate. And now? Now we stop pretending, Patricia said. The Velthary demanded our colonies. We will give them our answer. In the dead system, the human fleet completed its assembly. 700 warships formed in the battle groups, their crews preparing for the conflict that would reveal humanity's true nature to the galaxy. Nathan Cole stood on the bridge of the Endurance, no longer a small ship in a modest fleet, but the coordination center for the most powerful military force humanity had ever assembled. The countdown to the deadline continued. In 6 days, the Velthary would learn that they had never understood humans at all. Claire Dawson had been smiling for 15 years. She smiled when alien diplomats insulted her world. She smiled when they called humans primitive and backward. She smiled when they laughed at Earth's small fleet and limited territory. The smile never reached her eyes, but nobody in the Galactic Concorde ever looked closely enough to notice. The Concorde's capital station was a massive structure that floated in the heart of civilized space. Thousands of species sent their representatives here to conduct business, negotiate treaties, and maintain the careful balance of power that had existed for 10,000 years. Humans had joined this great assembly 3 centuries ago, and in all that time, they had been treated as barely tolerable guests, rather than true members. Claire stood in the observation deck of the human embassy, watching ships from a dozen different species pass by the station's windows. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. She was 52 years old, with gray streaking through her brown hair and lines around her mouth from all those years of forced smiles. Behind her, the embassy staff worked quietly at their stations, maintaining the careful pretense that had defined humanity's place in the galaxy. The door opened, and her assistant, a young man named Kevin Hart, entered with a worried expression on his face. "Ambassador, the Velthary delegation has requested an immediate meeting. Overseer Keth is coming personally." Claire felt her stomach tighten, but her face remained calm. The Velthary were the most powerful military force in the Concord. Their empire spanned 300 star systems, and their fleet numbered in the thousands. When the Velthary wanted something, they usually got it. "Show them to the conference room," Claire said. "I will be there shortly." She took a moment to compose herself before leaving the observation deck. Whatever Keth wanted, it would not be good for Earth. It never was. The conference room was a modest space compared to the grand chambers used by more powerful species. The Velthary delegation filled it with their presence. Overseer Keth stood at the center, his scaled body towering over the human furniture. His yellow eyes fixed on Claire as she entered, and his thin lips pulled back to reveal rows of sharp teeth in what passed for a Velthary smile. "Ambassador Dawson," Keth said, his voice deep and resonant. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice." "The Velthary Empire is always welcome in our embassy," Claire replied, taking her seat across from him. "How may Earth be of service?" Keth's smile widened. He enjoyed this part. Claire could see it in the way he leaned forward, savoring the moment before delivering bad news. "The Empire requires additional territory for our growing population," Keth said. "After careful consideration, we have determined that 3 of your colony worlds would serve our needs admirably. The systems designated as New Portland, Harvest, and Morning Star." Claire kept her expression neutral, even as her heart began to pound. Those 3 colonies were home to nearly 8 million humans. They were not military outposts or mining operations. They were homes filled with families who had built their lives among the stars. "Those worlds are sovereign human territory," Claire said carefully. "They've been settled for over a century. The Concord recognizes that territorial adjustments are sometimes necessary for the greater good," Keth replied. "The Velthary Empire's need is greater than humanity's attachment to a few small colonies. You have 7 standard days to begin evacuation procedures. And if we refuse?" Keth laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the conference room walls. "Ambassador, let us not pretend that refusal is an option. Your species has a small fleet and limited resources. The Velthary Empire could take those worlds by force in a matter of hours. We are offering you the courtesy of a peaceful transfer. I suggest you accept our generosity." Claire looked at the overseer for a long moment. She had heard speeches like this before. Every species that dealt with humans assumed they would comply because they always had. For 300 years, humanity had bowed and scraped and accepted whatever the galaxy demanded of them. "I will need to consult with Earth before providing a response," Claire said. "Of course," Keth said, rising from his seat. "Take your 7 days, Ambassador. Consult with your leaders. Weep for your lost colonies if you must. But when the deadline arrives, I expect your compliance. The alternative would be most unpleasant for your species." The Velthary delegation departed, leaving Claire alone in the conference room. She sat in silence for several minutes, her hands flat on the table, her breathing slow and controlled. Then she stood and walked to her private office. The room was small and simply furnished. Claire locked the door behind her and activated the security systems that would prevent any surveillance from penetrating the walls. Then she sat at her desk and opened a communication channel that only a handful of humans knew existed. The screen flickered to life, showing the face of Admiral Patricia Lane. Patricia was an older woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She commanded Earth's defense force, or at least the portion of it that the galaxy knew about. "Ambassador," Patricia said, "I received word that Keth delivered his ultimatum." "3 colonies," Claire replied. 8 million people. 7 days. Patricia nodded slowly. "And what is your assessment?" Claire took a deep breath. This moment had been coming for 300 years. Generation after generation of humans had worked toward it, building in secret, preparing for the day when pretending would no longer be enough. Claire's grandmother had been part of the project. Her mother had dedicated her life to it. And now the choice fell to Claire. "They will never stop," Claire said. "If we give them 3 colonies today, they will demand 10 more tomorrow. The Concord sees us as prey, Patricia. They always have. No matter how much we smile, no matter how many insults we swallow, they will keep taking until there is nothing left. Then you know what must be done." Claire closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, her expression had changed. The diplomatic mask she had worn for 15 years was gone, replaced by something harder and more determined. "Begin protocol revelation," she said. Patricia's face remained steady, but Claire could see the weight of the moment in her eyes. "Understood, Ambassador. May God help us all." The screen went dark. Claire sat alone in her office, feeling the enormity of what she had just set in motion. Across human space, people who had kept secrets their entire lives were receiving the same message. Engineers who had built weapons in hidden facilities. Scientists who had developed technology that surpassed anything the Concord possessed. Soldiers who had trained for battles that might never come. For 3 centuries, humanity had smiled and bowed and pretended to be harmless. They had accepted every insult because fighting back would have meant destruction. But they had also been preparing, quietly and patiently, for the day when they would finally be strong enough to stop pretending. That day had arrived. Claire Dawson stood and walked to her window. The lights of the Concord station glittered in the darkness of space. Somewhere out there, Overseer Keth was celebrating his easy victory, certain that the humans would comply as they always did. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. Claire allowed herself one small smile, and for the first time in 15 years, it was genuine.